Hello, we're here on beautiful Golden Pond, and today I'm going to show you how to put together one of our toboggan making kits. So I've already unwrapped the toboggan. We send them out rolled up pretty tight in a drum. So I've unwrapped it, and the first thing you can do is take a look at the plastic. We've got 3 different lengths, a couple different grades, ultra high molecular weight and high density polyethylene. But they'll be in the same shape. They'll already have, you can probably barely see it on the screen there, but they'll come with holes pre-drilled for the crossbar locations. I put a little mark on the side to help you with the crossbar lineup as well. And then you can get into the rest of the kit. The kit comes with a written instruction manual, which I'll be updating as I do this video. I'll be taking some fresh photos and getting that up to speed for 2018. We've gone for all of the best quality components throughout. We've got hardwood crossbars, stainless hardware, 5mm climbing accessory cord for high strength and high abrasion resistance. We use a high-end polyester webbing, which has a really nice soft feel and does really well for lashing even when it's wet or cold. Stainless anodized buckles on the same polyester webbing here. Solid brass for the O-rings, and a 3mm accessory cord for the pressix, and nylon for brake line. And of course, leather tump, copper rivets, and again solid brass in the hardware as well. Yeah, all weather resistant. This is designed, it can last you decades, and we've gone some of our toboggans have probably seen 100 days or more on trip, although we do try to cycle them after every few years. In addition to the materials we supply, you'll need a few basic tools of your own. Got a drill and a driver. Selectable speed on the driver is really handy. Selection of drill bits, various sizes, we'll go over that. Some electrical tape to mark the depth on the drill bit, or a permanent marker does an okay job marking the depth as well. A countersink bit. You can also get these integrated pilot hole countersink bits. I've found, and you can probably see it there, they really tend to gum up with plastic and then they don't cut as well, and I spend a lot of time cleaning the plastic out. So I don't use these, but they can be handy. This one actually has a stop collar, a depth collar that I can attach as well, and that can be handy. But yeah, I find the jamming is sort of outweighs its effectiveness. Also got a really fancy countersink bit here, adjustable. But I'll stick with sort of the basic stuff for today. 2 or more clamps, just simple little clamps, are all you need for this. Drive bits, you'll need number 2 Robertson and number 2 Phillips. And in addition to the power driver, it's nice to have a screwdriver as well. Just a small smooth-faced hammer. Measuring tape, the marker I mentioned, and a finish to put on your wood. I'm using linseed oil. You could use a marine spar varnish. Any sort of good exterior finish that's going to protect the wood would be fine. I like linseed oil because it's nice and simple to apply. Could be easily reapplied without any sanding if need be, although I've never felt the need to reapply. Of course, a rag applicator if you're doing linseed oil, or a brush if you're doing varnish. And then just a length of wood is handy too, like a 2x4 or similar. Just helps, well, you'll see when we get into putting the crossbars on, it can be handy for that. So yeah, nothing fancy really, drill, driver, and screwdriver, measuring tape, that sort of thing. So basic hand tools. Oh, and one I almost forgot to mention, an awl can be handy for marking the locations of the bolts and T-nuts at the ends of the crossbar. So this is just a homemade awl, just snipped the head off of a small nail, pre-drilled a hole in this piece of wood and just drove the nail backwards into that hole. So just got something to put a little mark. Probably a sharp pencil would do it as well. Well, it's been a few months since I've been making toboggans, so almost forgot a couple items. You're going to want a heat gun or a hair dryer, or I've heated them up over the wood stove before, but a heat source to warm your plastic for bending the curl in the hood, and a candle and lighter matches to seal the ends of your 3mm cord when you cut it. And finally, it is a big area, a big project, so just having a nice big workbench to work on is helpful. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. I just use the pallet that the plastic comes on when I get it shipped to me, and by the time the pallet's worn out, it's usually time to order more plastic, so that works out well. Just something that's going to bring it up to a comfortable working height. So let's get started here. We're going to start with the crossbars. We'll get in a little closer, take a look at those. So you're going to get a pack of crossbars. Unlike these ones, they're not going to have a finish on them. So they'll be like this one, unfinished, and you'll have to put a coat of linseed oil or spar varnish on there. But before you do that, you want to take a look. The first one we've got is our headboard, which I might also refer to as crossbar number 1. And it looks a lot different than the others. It's got a groove there. It's going to fit right over the end of the plastic, and it's got our logo there. The rest of them have numbers. They're hard to see. They're just in pencil, but they'll be numbered on the back from 2 through 6, 7, or 8, depending on the length of your toboggan. So crossbar number 2 is our hauling crossbar, and it doesn't have any grooves in it. The rest of the crossbars are going to be grooved at the edges, and the last one, which will be number 6, 7, or 8, depending on the length of your toboggan, will have a third groove right in the middle. Now I've taken to rounding over the grooves for you, so you might be able to tell a little bit there that just hit it with the router so that it's a little softer transition there. We don't have a sharp edge that's going to wear on your line. But you could take a look if there's anywhere you felt that needed a little bit of sanding. You could sand down any edges. If you felt there was a rough edge in any of the grooves, you could take a little rasp or a little bit of sandpaper wrapped on a screwdriver, clean that up a little bit. You go through all your crossbars, just make sure that you're happy with them, ready to install them. And then, like I said, you'll want to put a little coat of linseed oil, just rub it on with a rag. Well, follow the directions. It'll tell you to rub it on with a rag, let it sit for a little bit and rub off the excess. If you're using any other finish, then again, just follow the directions with those. Of course, be aware oily rags should be disposed of properly, airtight container or wood stove. So I've just kind of skipped ahead on that step so that we can get to making our toboggan, because obviously we would need to wait for the finish to dry. Now I didn't mention it earlier, but the reason I've numbered each crossbar is because each one is slightly, with the exception of number 3 and 4, which are the same length, each one is slightly different length. So the toboggan has a traditional coffin shape, which we can kind of see reflected here in the size of the crossbars. So it starts out narrowest at the head, widens here to the shoulders, and then it's going to taper back towards the tail. As a result, each crossbar is slightly different in length, and that's why I've had them numbered. So you will have to follow that order. So you've applied a couple of coats of linseed oil, let them dry. You can set your crossbars off to the side. And now it's time to take a look at the plastic and get it prepped. These things build up static electricity like crazy, so they attract every bit of dust in the area. So really, you'll drive yourself mad trying to get every little bit of dust off of them. But take a look. Don't worry about the dust, but if you feel like there's some saw marks or something you want to clean up, you can do that along the edge. And then we're looking for those holes that I've pre-drilled. Now every crossbar is going to end up having 5 fasteners. With the exception of the tail, we'll get 6 fasteners. But 5 fasteners, you'll only find a series of 3 holes. Now I've done that because if we take a look, I'm sitting here in the middle of the toboggan. We're on crossbar number 4. If I grab crossbar 4 and lay it on top here, You might not be able to tell, but it's just slightly short from the plastic, and I'd rather have your crossbar be slightly inset than sticking out beyond the plastic. And there's outside of the groove, I want the running line staying pretty well as close to the outer edge of the toboggan as possible, but I need to leave a little bit of wood there to have some strength for the connection on the outside of the crossbar here. And so I've done the 3 interior holes for you. The 2 outside holes you're going to have to figure out for yourself, because there might be some variation there, so I wanted to let you drill that hole so that you could make sure you could land it right in the center of your crossbar. If I pre-drilled the hole, it might not line up perfectly on every single person's crossbar. So you'll find a series of 3 holes. At this time, you'll also want to mark on the outside edge where that crossbar will go. So I actually, when I put my template on and cut all these to the coffin shape, I put those marks on for you. I use black on black, which you can see, but you just have to look closely. So if I look from the outside here, I can just see a mark, but if you want to just touch that mark up, you can. If you can't find the mark, then just use one of your long crossbars, your number 3 or your number 4, and go to each series of 3 holes and just mark both sides of the plastic and move that along to your next hole. Do the same thing. Just use this crossbar as a straight edge and get little marks on the outside edge of the plastic. Okay? So that's your crossbars ready to go, your plastic ready to go. It's now time to start assembly. Alright, we're almost ready to start assembling this. We'll just need to prepare our drill bit. So you're going to grab a 7/64 drill bit. You can mark it in a couple of different ways. Electrical tape, a little black marker. You're probably having trouble seeing the black marker, but so I'll use the electrical tape because it's easier to see. Small bits and small fasteners here. So I'm just going to align it there, the tape, so that I'm basically pre-drilling the depth of the screw. I find that the electrical tape, even though it's easier to see, it can creep a little bit without me noticing, and then you know, it's a very small crossbar, so a little bit of extra depth and you'll be through the crossbar. So I like to just do a little bit of permanent marker there on the bit. So there we go. Okay, you check that drill bit in your drill. Keep your countersink bit handy. Get your drive bit in your driver. If you've got another drill, then put your countersink in that and you won't be switching bits around. And then you'll get the little baggie of the number 8 by 3/4 inch flathead screws. Now you can get your piece of plastic up on the 2x4 or chunk of wood you grabbed earlier. It's not necessary, but it does make it a little handier for clamping your crossbars. You'll need 2 or more clamps. I work with 4. I just find this a little faster for my workflow. If you want to clamp on all your crossbars, you can do that. Or if you just want to work with 2 clamps and do one at a time, that's fine too, of course. Now, before we start installing, if you have any machine marks on the, not saw blade marks on the edge, but machine marks on the face of the toboggan, then you'll want to put those on the top side of the finished toboggan so they won't be running against the snow. So on the top side of the finished toboggan, which in our case right now is going to point down. So if you've got any marks, you want to put them down so that you aren't seeing them while you're working here. Then I'll grab a couple of crossbars. Like I said, I do 2 at a time. Set aside the headboard for now, so we'll start with crossbars 2 and 3. And just slip it between the piece of wood and your plastic. And I'm just looking here at those little black marks I put on the edge of the plastic, and I'll line up the crossbar with those marks. And because I'm elevated up on that piece of wood, I can get these clamps on pretty easily. And these clamps are fairly weak, which is nice because then once I see that I've got them lined up, the next thing I'll do is just make sure they're centered. And I just do that by feel because my crossbar is probably 1/8 of an inch short. At most it'd be 1/4 of an inch short, so I'd have 1/8 of an inch both sides. And I can do that by feel. So I'll just feel both sides of the crossbar and the plastic and just push or pull a little bit to get it centered in the plastic. So I've got about 1/16 of an inch of plastic overhanging my crossbar both sides. Same step for crossbar number 3. So crossbars 1, 2, and 3 are all going to be part of the curl. So they're a little tighter here, and then they'll get more spaced out as we go further down the toboggan. So again, just slipped it in underneath, lining it up with the little black mark. I'm not worried about it being perfect because these clamps, I can still kind of adjust the piece of wood. So I've got it centered on the black marks, and then I'll get it centered in the width of the toboggan just by feel here. Okay, so I've got those two clamped on, and then I'll go and I've already put the holes in the plastic, and then we want to drill the pilot holes into the wood. So we'll just drive down to the mark that you placed earlier with your marker or your electrical tape. Okay, and then you'll switch over. So we're just doing the 3 interior screws per crossbar for now. We'll worry about the outer edges later. The countersink bit, again, I talked about having an adjustable one. Probably unlikely that you will have an adjustable, so I just do it by eye, and you can drive do your first one, drive the screw, see how it goes, and then adjust accordingly. It's pretty easy to kind of gauge how deep you want this. Okay, and then I'll drive my screws, so I'll bring the camera a little closer here. Do one, and then you could drive it down to test. I like to put my drill or my driver on slow speed because we're not getting into a lot of wood there with the short length of these screws, so I find you can strip the wood if you overdrive it. And I can see clearly that my screw heads are down, buried beneath the surface of the plastic. If you're not sure, just run your hand over, see if it feels like it'll create any extra drag for you. You can put your hand underneath as well, and you'll just feel the plastic tighten down onto the crossbar, and that gives you a good sense of getting appropriate tension without stripping the wood. When in doubt, you could grab your manual screwdriver and just check your tension on your screws as well. And then I'll move along. I've already, I forgot to tape crossbars 2 and 3 for you, just done 4 and 5. So we'll get on to 6 and 7, which will take me to the end of a 10-foot toboggan. So we'll move over there. Pretty well the same, very minor difference. Most of our crossbars are going to get 3 screws and 2 bolts. The final crossbar, to give it some more strength for lowering down hills, we're going to have just 2 screws and then 4 bolts. So you'll only find 2 holes there. Sometimes I don't even pre-drill the holes at the back. It's very easy for you to determine where on the piece of plastic that final number 7 crossbar is going to go. And that location is basically very, very close to the end, but with just a tiny lip of plastic sticking out, which can be handy to catch a ski pole or just a push stick, so that on the way up a hill or just on a hard day on a long lake, then someone behind you can grab their pole and just sort of lean into the back of your toboggan, and if they're feeling good, they can loan a little bit of energy to you for the day. So in this case, I have done the holes. There are 2 holes. You probably can't see them, but there are 2 holes there at the back of the piece of plastic. If yours doesn't have those 2 holes, then just slide your crossbar back so you've got maybe 1/4 of an inch, 3/8 of an inch of plastic sticking out, and then you can lay on a couple of holes about 3 inches in from either edge. So we'll slip those crossbars into place. Again, just repeating that process. I'm lining up the crossbar on those little black marks that you or I laid on earlier. Get the clamps on. And then I use just my fingers there with a little bit of feel to make sure the crossbar is centered inside the width of the plastic, so I've got equal plastic both sides. Centered on the marks, centered in the width, and then we're ready to drill our pilot holes, our countersink, and drive our screws. At this point, you've got 2 or 3 screws in every crossbar except for the headboard, which we haven't dealt with yet. So you can take off all your clamps. And you can also get rid of that piece of wood. You won't need it anymore. So as I mentioned, we connect the crossbars with 3 screws in the middle and then 1 bolt on either end. The exception to this is the hauling crossbar, crossbar number 2. There's a couple reasons for that. It never feels an outward force or a force pulling it away from the plastic. The only force it ever feels is it being pulled by the haul lines into the plastic. So we don't need that extra pull-out strength the bolts provide. The other advantage of the bolts is that there's so little wood here between the groove that I make and the end of the crossbar, again because I try to get those running lines nice and tight to the edge of the toboggan. So with so little wood, it's easy to split that wood, and that's why we switched the bolts with a through bolt. Obviously you're not going to split the wood when you pre-drill the hole, but we don't have a groove in crossbar number 2, so it's much less liable to splitting, and it lets us kind of sneak that screw in a little bit farther from the edge. So we don't need the pull-out strength of the bolts. We're not worried about splitting nearly so much. So we can just install a couple more screws at the outside edge of crossbar 2 here. You're not going to have pre-drilled holes in the plastic. You do have the little black mark on the edge of the plastic, which helps, should identify the center of the crossbar, or you could just poke your head over and see where the center of the crossbar is. And then you'll come about 3/4 of an inch in. So I pre-drilled my pilot holes, do my countersink. It's the exact same process here as all the other screws we've installed thus far. This will be it for the flathead screws. So you might have a few extra in your bag, but those are just extra. Put them in your repair kit. Okay, so that's all the fasteners we're going to put in crossbar number 2, and now we'll focus on the rest of the crossbars back from that, and we'll get the bolts into them. So the first thing you're going to want to do for the bolts and T-nuts is flip your toboggan over. So you're looking at the top side. And now we want this T-nut to look nice and neat on the top of the toboggan. We don't want to have it sticking out past the wood, which we might do if we just decided to start drilling from the bottom. So I line it up here in the center of the crossbar so that it's just inset a tiny bit from the edge. Hopefully you can see that there, just inset a tiny bit. And that's where your awl will come in handy, which I haven't grabbed. So you just grab your awl and just place a little mark. You'll barely see it, but that'll be, and again, try to get your, make sure your awl is right centered in your nut. You can go ahead and do that. If you're worried, test your first one, but then after that, you'll be faster to go ahead and mark out all the crossbars. So I'll go ahead and do that now. That tail crossbar is actually going to get 4 bolts, 2 at the outer edges, 2 close to the center, but I don't want to move you around too much. So for now, when you get to the tail, just mark the 2 outside ones. We'll get these bolts installed and then we can mark the remaining 2 on the tail after that. So I put my little mark, and then you'll want an 11/64 drill bit for the bolt and a 15/64 for the nut. Now if you're having trouble seeing your marks on your bits, you can just do a test hole in a scrap of wood. So I've got a little template that I use for various things in the project. The 11/64 for the bolt should run nice and smoothly through the piece of wood. We're not trying to get these machine threads to bite into the wood at all. They'll just connect to the nut, so we don't want the wood interfering there. And then the 15/64 hole should nicely fit the nut. So you can just test the fit on both of those things if you want with a test hole, or if you trust me and can see the marks on your bits, it's an 11/64 to start right now. So this will be a through hole right down through the plastic. Now obviously you'll try to keep it nice and square, but the advantage to starting from the top down is if you're out of square a little bit, you're not going to be able to tell on the bottom of the plastic. But if we drilled from the bottom up and we're a bit out of square, then our nut might end up you know, off center here on the crossbar. So I'll go ahead and just drill all those all the way back on the toboggan. Okay, so we've got the 11/64 hole all the way through, and that should let the bolt slide nicely through the hole. Now we need to open up the top of the hole to leave some space for the post on the nut to get down in there, and that's our 15/64. And we only need to do it the depth of the post on the nut here, which is, we can just take a look here to get a sense. It's about 1/4 of the depth of my crossbar. Because we already have a pilot hole there, our 15/64 is going to want to chew through this pretty quickly. So I like to set my drill to slow speed, and we don't need to get out calipers or anything here, but just nice and slow. Drill the hole. If you're a little bit deep, that's okay. Okay. And you can go ahead and do that for all of them. Drilling down just about the depth of the post or a little bit deeper with our 15/64 bit. We've got all our holes now in the tops of the crossbars to accept the nuts, but I don't like to put the nut in just yet. These bolts and nuts, they're great fasteners. They provide a lot of strength here. The one thing I have found is they want to cross thread quite easily, and then you can start stripping them and they can be a bit of a pain that way. And I think part of that might be I get a little bit of plastic in the hole, and then maybe that kind of throws off the connection there. So I still have to countersink the plastic. I like to do all of my cutting and drilling before I put the nut in. That way I can make sure the hole is really nice and clean and nothing's going to get in the way of the threads. So just means one extra flip of the toboggan. So I'll flip it over. Just like the screws, we're going to want to countersink those bolt heads down. It is a bigger hole now, so it can be, you can cut that countersink quite quickly and it can be a bit misleading. So again, you don't want to go too deep there. And just go ahead and go the full length of the toboggan here. Alright, I've gone and countersunk all of my holes for my bolt heads. I'm going to flip the toboggan one more time and install all those nuts. Again, we want the hole to be nice and clean. You can just take a look down in the holes. You could just manually clean it out if you want, if you do see anything. Okay. Once you've determined it's nice and clean, then we can drive the nuts down. Because of the soft nature of my workbench, I need to get a support right under it, so I'll just move my sawhorse a little bit here. You'll find in that little baggie a few pan head screws as well. Those will be for the headboard later. So I've just moved over a leg of my bench. You can align all your nuts the same way if you want to make it look nice. Just drive it down. And then, as always, you'll just move along. Do this for the rest of the toboggan. Alright, we've got all our nuts on. Flip. And a simple matter now of screwing in the bolts. So they should just drop right in down to the depth of where they first meet the bolt. And they should go in there quite readily. Oh, can't really see that, but anyways, it should tighten up quite readily, with the tension, of course, increasing as it gets tighter and tighter. And then you can stop when it gets nice and tight. But if your bolt doesn't want to just drop down in there, or if it feels like it might be cross-threaded, like it's not tightening up nicely at first, then you should back it off, because as I mentioned, if you've got a little bit of plastic in there, it can cause these fine threads to get cross-threaded, and at that point, if it kind of binds up with the nut before it really starts to pull it tight down into the wood, it can spin the nut, and anyways, you can start having a little bit of an issue. You'll need to get a screwdriver, a flat screwdriver, pop the nut out, and try again. You should find your bolt just drops right down to the nut, starts to thread into the nut really easily, and then gets really nice and tight. So you can go ahead and install all your bolts. Okay, we're back here at the tail crossbar. You can see 2 nuts are already installed. You just need to install 2 more. You already know how to install them. It's the exact same process. You just need to know the location. So we've got this groove right here, which is going to be the eventual location for attaching our brake line. So the crossbar here is going to take some additional force when we're lowering this down a steep hill, or if someone grabs onto your brake line as you're going uphill because they need a little boost, they'll be putting some force on there. So we'll reinforce that. And we just want it to be just outside, kind of maybe finger width or so outside that groove on either side. So I maybe looks like 1.5 inches apart here, so 3/4 of an inch either side of center. Okay, so that's every crossbar, all the hardware except for the headboard. So we'll move up to the headboard, we'll get it installed, and that'll be it for fasteners. Alright, so we're up at the headboard here now. We've got our toboggan now facing right side up so we can see the crossbars. So you're going to turn the logo down because it'll eventually be curled back up. And that should slip on there quite readily. So just slip her on. Again, you can just center it just by feel. I've got a little template I use. We're going to put 5 pan head screws. So I just put my little template on. We're going back now to that same bit we used to install the screws right at the start. And I'll drill my holes. So I've just basically put one hole in the middle, holes at the quarter mark, and then I didn't go right to the edge. I've got about an inch back in from the edge, and again that's because thin wood due to that groove, so I don't want to split it. And so the template was kind of holding me high a little bit. I'll just make sure I'm down to my little gauge again. So this is one of those times where you'll end up wanting to use your measuring tape just to get those locations for those holes. Just pretty well evenly spaced across there, 5 holes. Now we can just basically go right away and put those 3 center ones in, and they shouldn't give us any trouble. Just before the screw bites into the plastic, it will start to jack up the wood on the headboard here, and again, thin piece of wood, so we don't want to crack that. So just have your thumb there holding the wood down. Once you've got one screw in, that'll help protect the other ones nearby. Still like to do all this on slow speed. So I can watch what's going on. Now the outside ones, sometimes I will just increase the size of the hole there just through the wood. We still want to make sure the screw is biting into the plastic and the wood behind, but we can widen out the holes in the first part of the wood there just to reduce the chance of splitting. So I'll do that now. So that is all your hardware installed now. There's really not too many ways you can totally screw up this project, but there's some potential for splitting some wood or stripping some screws or nuts. So all that is gone now. There's really, from here out, really nothing you can do wrong, which is nice.